Wow, so my name is Mikey Siegel, and I put together the meeting tonight with help from a number of other people. It's really wonderful to see all of you here. This is our third location for the consciousness hacking meetups. We started in Santa Cruz, and then we started a meetup in San Francisco, and when we first started those, there was like 10 people or 12 people, and then it's incredible, over 100 people RSVP'd. I don't know how many people are here now, more will continue to come, but even if 50 people show up for our first meetup, it's really awesome. And it's a sign to me, and continuing evidence from the San Francisco meetups as well that there's something interesting happening here. There's something very interesting at this intersection point. And this intersection point, which I'll talk about more, actually I'll talk a lot about, you guys will get sick of hearing me talk about it, doesn't really have any definition or community or structure around it. And broadly speaking, this intersection point is technology and science, and you could say consciousness or well-being, or really thinking about our inner experience, our subjective experience, the way that we feel, the way that we experience reality, our minds, our perception, and asking questions, not just philosophically or abstractly or in a research sense, but asking questions as technologists, as makers, as doers, about what we can create, what we can build to reimagine the relationship between technology and humanity, and how technology could be used to fundamentally change human experience. And I believe there's an incredible potential there. I think there's a lot of evidence for it. I think we're only limited by our imagination in that respect. And so today, the structure for the meeting is sort of the only time usually that this happens that I'll actually give a long presentation about just how I'm thinking about consciousness hacking and my personal history with it, just to give it some personal grounding. And then I also have another chunk of presentation which just goes through a whirlwind tour of cool projects, cool ideas in the space, interesting research, the basic kind of concepts that you need to know to kind of get the lay of the land. It's kind of like a broad overview of what's happening in the space. So that's what we have in store for mainly the bulk of it, probably an hour or so. Then we're really lucky to have Jacob Redmond here. Where's Jacob? Jacob in the back, who is a research scientist from Emotiv, and he has a background in doing meditation research. Emotiv, for those of you that don't know, is one of the main companies doing consumer EEG headsets. So these are devices that you put on your head that actually read your brain waves, which was normally reserved for clinical and research use only for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Emotiv is a company that is making some of the best, most accessible devices for mainstream consumers and low-cost research. And he's going to be doing a live demo of a prototype that they have that is not on the market, and it's going to be one of the first times that it's been demoed live. So we're really lucky to have Jacob here as well. And at the end of the meetup, the way we usually finish off is we like to give an open forum to the community. I find, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I find that the group of people that's here right now tends to be a group of people that has, in the broader world, kind of a unique set of interests, and maybe it's hard to find people to connect with in terms of those interests. And I also find that usually when this group comes together, people get really excited because all of a sudden they're meeting all of these people that are into the same stuff that they're into. So the end part is an opportunity for people to come up and do 2 minutes on stage. I time it, so it's very strict. And you can use that 2 minutes to pitch a project, to just talk about what you're interested in, to find people that have a shared interest, to talk about an idea, to, really, it could be anything. There's not really a limit, and incredible things have come from that. Startups have formed, people have done project collaborations, there's been moves towards venture capital funding, all kinds of things happen from those things. So just know there's a very diverse crowd here, a very impressive crowd, people that are doing lots of amazing stuff. So use the opportunity to get to know everyone that you can. Now, to start us off, we're going to have Mark, who's here in the audience, who is a professor here at Sofia University, to kind of set the stage for the location that we're at. This is actually not just a random spot that was willing to host the meetup. Actually, there's a deeper connection here. Sofia University is the home of the new Transformative Technology Research Lab, started by me and a couple other collaborators. And the focus of that research lab is, and I'll talk about it more in a little bit, is to have an academic context, to begin looking at this intersection point, to begin not only from a research perspective, but also from an industry commercial perspective, to think about how we can develop these new technologies that can directly interface with our brains, with our bodies, in a way that can deeply increase human well-being, reduce stress, reduce anxiety, help meditation, all of these things. So to kind of set the context, I'm going to invite Mark up here. Mark, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mikey, and welcome to Sofia University. The school was founded in 1975 as the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, and now we're going through a fascinating transformation to become a place to do just the very things Mikey was describing about this first Silicon Valley consciousness hacking meetup. That is, we have a group of creative, diverse, engaged people coming together to share ideas, to meet each other, to imagine the future, and that really is what a university is about. And that's the kind of space for teaching and learning we're creating and holding here. The school is recently under new leadership by President Liz Lee, who's in the back. Please stand up, Liz.
Welcome to Sofia University.
She's a computer scientist from Wuhan University who's been working in the United States at Sony and other places for the last 20 years. What we're doing now is implementing her vision, a vision very much what Mikey said about reimagining the relationship between humanity and technology. So we welcome you here and hope you'll pay attention to us and our programs as they develop. I'm also in addition to being a professor and chair of the PhD programs, the director of the William James Center for Consciousness Studies. And soon we will be having a series of lectures and talks and meetups that I think will work very well with consciousness hacking and the Transformative Technology Lab. So if you have more questions, please say hello to me. I'll be here for the meetup. Welcome, and I hope we'll see you again.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Liz, and thanks to Sofia University at large for hosting us and supporting this overall movement. So with that, I'm going to dive in. So I'm going to start this talk with kind of my own personal journey to give some context for where I'm at and maybe how to understand the space a little better. So this is where I started. I did my graduate work. This was at the MIT Media Lab, looking at social robots, really the way that humans interact with technology in a social context. And that ranged from doing all the kind of hardcore computer engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, all that kind of stuff. And then on top of it, social psychology side of things, so running a 350-person human subject study. So kind of got this broad perspective on technology. But after finishing my graduate work and kind of going out into the world, even though I was doing stuff that was very cool, on a personal level, probably something that many other people have encountered, after sort of checking off on my list all the things that I thought were kind of my these are going to make you happy things, these are the things that are going to make you feel fulfilled, I kind of ran up against this problem, which is that I didn't feel fulfilled. There was a clear sense that something was missing, that the outside context around me was not going to be enough to make me feel, you could say, whole or complete or happy in a deep and meaningful way. And so I kind of did what many people who have spent enough time in Santa Cruz have done, which is go off on a vision quest of sorts. So I did the India thing and meditation retreats, and it really became what started as a quest to kind of find my ultimate purpose, like the job I was going to have or something like that, actually really turned into kind of a systematic process of going inward and kind of working through, using different techniques and different modalities, what was happening on the inside. And I was on one of these meditation retreats, and it was like a 10-day Vipassana retreat, and it was day number 7, I think, and it was after around 8 hours of sitting, and I was in excruciating pain. My legs were numb and my back was hurting, and something happened very immediately. It was an instantaneous transition, but in that moment, my entire experience shifted. I always forget that slide. Now you get it. My entire experience shifted, and even though there was still physical pain, and nothing about the context changed, my experience of that, my perception of that, fundamentally changed. And the way that it changed was somehow it was okay. There was a fundamental and profound sense of acceptance in that moment of what was arising. And even though that slowly faded over time, the deep thing that I took from that experience was that is available for each of us in this moment. That we have a capacity to experience life largely free of the mental causes of suffering. Not free from disease, physical injury, disagreements with other people, difficult life circumstances, maybe even war in the world, I don't know. But from an individual perspective, we all have the ability to perceive that, to cope with that, to flow with that in a fundamentally different way, in a way that isn't inherently filled with conflict, but in a way that can be filled with acceptance. And so, beyond even having a specific spiritual message about it, I just knew, wow, this is real. This is possible. And so, I went back and was really excited about pursuing these practices, but what I began to realize was that these practices were designed a few thousand years ago, in many cases, for a very different social context. And so I had a lot of issues, sort of incorporating them into my life, because what the world around me was demanding, which was sort of a continual engagement with a stream of information. Information coming from my phone, information coming from my computer, from my email, from Facebook. What these practices wanted from me was actually to unplug, to separate from that content, and to go within and to be silent. And so, not that there's anything wrong with those practices, but there was a direct contradiction here. There was a direct conflict between them. And what I came to realize after sort of shifting my context and kind of putting my engineer's hat on and thinking about this problem as an engineer, I realized these practices, in some cases 3,000 years old, in some cases somewhat modern, these practices really were very scientific. They're just scientific from a subjective perspective, not from a quantitative perspective. And that 3,000 years ago, Buddhists, for example, had rigorously examined and dissected the nature of mind, the nature of thought. And now there's really fruitful collaborations going on between Buddhists and contemplative researchers for that reason. But what clicked was that there really was no fundamental difference between these so-called ancient practices or traditional techniques and modern technology. They both were systematic, structured pointers, you could say, or systems designed to change our relationship to our own mind and to reality. And so, to give someone the formal instruction of precisely how they should follow their breath, or precisely how they should notice the thoughts changing, and exactly what meditation leads to the next meditation leads to the next meditation. That's not something that grows on a tree. That's a human invention. That is a technology. And there is no reason why the technology that fills our world now can't be a direct evolution of that same process. It just so happens that 3,000 years ago, the best tools that we had were written and spoken language. Now, we have much more sophisticated and interesting extensions that go well beyond language. And so, with that motivation, I kind of jumped down this rabbit hole, and I ended up traveling all over the world. It's been, I don't know, 4 years around now that I just dropped everything and fully committed myself to exploring this possibility. And this is me using an experimental electrical brain stimulation device, which, you know, if you want to do that, we can talk about it. I was building all kinds of gadgets, both personally, but also doing a lot of deep research into the history of this pursuit, which it's not new, and then the modern context for this pursuit, and all of the technologies that could possibly be used in this context. From high-level, you know, 100,000 or multi-million-dollar research level, real-time fMRI feedback machines, or magnetic brain stimulation machines, or DIY versions of similar devices. And I ended up actually doing some collaborations with a lot of interesting researchers, ended up in Hong Kong. These are a few people that were sort of major impacts on my path. And ended up kind of diving deeper into my own prototypes, building my own projects, and I can talk about some of those. I can talk about some of those later on. And I came out of it with a number of things. But one of the main things that I came out of it with was a very, very clear realization that we are at a unique time. I mean, you're always at a unique time, but the reason why I say that is because there does not seem to be, at this point, any major limitation to pursuing exactly what I'm pointing at. Culturally, the stage is set. There is an incredible foundation built in academia in terms of meditation research, which has already begun to bring these Eastern ideas into mainstream academic context. And the technological capabilities are far more advanced than any of the ideas that we've had about how to use them. So right now, the only limitation is human ingenuity and creativity. That's really it. And so there's an interesting kind of thing that happens here, which is that as we begin to move these ideas into a Western context, from an Eastern context, where the Eastern context is subjective, the Western context is quantitative, what we can begin to do is we can begin to build what you could say is a map, right? A conceptual map of the terrain. The map is essentially our model of how this all works in the brain, in the body, whatever it is. And then the classic relationship between research and engineering, or science and engineering, is once you have the map, you can then build technologies based on that understanding. So in the same way that our understanding of biological science led to the eradication of smallpox, why can't our understanding of enlightenment from a research perspective lead to the eradication of human suffering in the world? So this general concept, there's a bunch of different names for it. In this context, this is the idea of consciousness hacking. And it's certainly in mainstream, whether academic or commercial or consumer or hacker context, is a fairly obscure idea. It does have some traction already. This is an fMRI machine. And what it does is it actually, I'll talk about it a little bit later, but what it does is it actually can look at activity inside of your brain spatially. So meaning, you know, it's not perfect, but you can get a rough idea of, imagine a 3D model of the brain, of what's going on in a particular area of that brain. And so there's been of course, a ton of different forms of research that have happened using this. It's one of the main tools in neuroscience, but a group of researchers, one of them named Judson Brewer, began by looking at meditators that have had over 10,000 hours of meditation experience. And what he was looking for was a particular pattern in their brain, some kind of signature, something that was particularly different about these long-term meditators who not just had meditated for a long time, but had a profoundly different experience of reality and life than most people. And after a number of studies, they felt that they had identified one particular part of the brain, not the only part of the brain, but one particular part of the brain that they felt was highly correlated to this experience that these meditators were having. And so they did something very interesting. They took novice meditators, people that had very little meditation experience. They put them inside of this machine, and these meditators were looking at a screen right above them like this. So they're lying in the machine and they're looking at a screen like this. And what they see on the screen is the activity as a graph of that particular part of the brain. And there's a very interesting, well-established concept called biofeedback or neurofeedback, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And really what it is a form of technology-assisted self-awareness, where you use the technology as a form of self-reflection to help you understand your inner process more deeply. And so that's exactly what happened here. By looking at the screen and being able to actually watch this part of the brain change in activity. This is the graph of a novice meditator. The red is bad, the blue is good. You're trying to deactivate this part of the brain. You can see 1 trial, 2 trials, 3 trials, no real success here, right? What happened at trial number 4 is that they had a realization. The meditation they were doing was to pay attention to their breath. And the realization they had was, oh, I'm not supposed to think about my breath. I'm supposed to feel my breath. And it was a turning point. And you can see this fundamental change in the graph. It's not just a change in brain activity. It's a change in how they feel. And that's what's critical. By using these tools, you can fundamentally change and guide someone towards an altered, desirable experience. So, oh, I forgot about that. So what's interesting is there is this fusion happening between East and West, but actually it goes both directions. It's not just the West that's sort of pulling in and finally embracing ideas from the East. At a major neuroscience conference, the Dalai Lama was quoted as saying, if it was possible to become free of negative emotions by a riskless implementation of an electrode without impairing intelligence in the critical mind, I would be the first patient. That's one of my favorite Dalai Lama quotes. And so I think what we're actually seeing, not just in academia, but also in a consumer technology context, this same transition happening, and I don't even think people are aware of it. But I'm sure you're all familiar with this flood of self-tracking, quantified self, wearable devices that are filling the market. But what are these technologies if not a form of technology-assisted self-reflection? A way of using technology to increase our self-awareness, to know ourselves more deeply. The one thing, though, to keep in mind about the kind of current wave of these technologies is this is how we interact with them, through charts and graphs. But if we think about meditation, for example, where is the information? Where are the concepts? Where are the updates, the charts, the graphs? Actually, the whole point here is to strive towards a non-conceptual, present moment experience, where you're not actually focused on and structured by some thought process, but you're actually deeply embedded in what it feels like to be alive right now. What it feels like to have joy or happiness or well-being. And if you think about probably the most memorable, profound moments of your life, they were not because of some thing you were thinking. It was probably an intimate moment that you were sharing with another person, looking in their eyes, holding them, watching a sunset, seeing something beautiful, or a child being born. These are things which have nothing to do with any particular thought. These are things that are much more profound and much more fundamental than thoughts or charts and graphs. So to kind of illustrate this, this is not like a boxing match, so there's no winner here. But there is a difference between quantified self. How many people are familiar with quantified self? Okay. So quantified self is kind of like the original seed of the whole wearable space, the whole self-tracking space. So the Nike, I've got two of them on right now, the Nike Fuel Band, the Basis Watch, the Fitbit. These are devices that you wear that monitor how many steps you take, mostly how many steps you take, but it can monitor your heart rate, it can monitor other aspects of your behavior as well. And so quantified self is like the root of that, where it all started. And then this is consciousness hacking. So kind of back and forth. QS, largely these are information-based interactions. Now, this is my take on consciousness hacking. You could have a different one. These are largely experience-based interactions. The feedback mechanism is largely charts and graphs. Here, the feedback could be a whole wide variety of things. It could be music, sound, light, visualizations, tactile feedback, any kind of present moment, visceral, sensory feedback. QS, the feedback is long-term, over days or weeks. Here, it could very likely be real-time feedback, something that's happening right now in the moment. With QS, the main focus is on behavior change. Here, the main focus is on changing your present moment subjective experience, your mental experience, your perceptual experience, your emotional experience. Here, in QS, it's largely future or goal-oriented. I'm doing this so I can get somewhere, so I can make more money, I can be more productive, I can make more friends. Here, the goal is really about this experience now. How do you feel in this moment? Can some interaction with technology increase your well-being, reduce your suffering, increase your mental clarity, increase your emotional balance, increase your sense of connectedness? And so, let's see. How are we doing? Oh, we're good. Okay. So to kind of illustrate this, I have a, should I do? Okay, let's try this out. I don't know if this is going to be instructive, but I have a couple live demos. So there's 4 technologies that I listed here. So the Misfit and the Basis, I'm wearing those. This is the Misfit, and this is the Basis watch. These are examples of self-tracking or quantified self technologies. And then I have 2 other technologies. And then I have 2 other technologies. One of them is, actually, will you do it? Will you put it on? Okay. One of them is the M-Wave, which is a device made by a company called HeartMath. And the other one is the Interaxon Muse, which is a device made by a company called Interaxon. And just being modeled by David here. So really quickly, I want to kind of give a real-world example of what the differences here are. So now the Basis watch, this is, oh, does it even have any data? Okay. So the Basis watch, oh, we don't even have any data. This, imagine there's data. So, I wonder if I can get, okay. So the interaction, it's funny. Like a demo will fail, like, no matter what, even if it's like online and correctly set up. So, so what this would be is essentially a graph showing my heart rate over time, how many steps I've taken over time, my resting heart rate. This actually does skin temperature and perspiration as well, and then it tries to calculate how many calories I've lost. And what this is a genuinely interesting tool for kind of tracking what I do, let's say over the course of a week. So I sit down on Sunday and I look at my graph and I say, okay, cool. Oh, I notice I didn't walk as much as I did last week, right? And they have a little interface here for you to set new goals, right? So you can set a goal for how many calories you want to burn or how many steps you want to take. And then maybe next week, that could be a motivator for you to move a little more, to take that extra walk, that kind of thing. And so this is really, if you think about it, a very mental process, right? You got to look at a graph, you got to think about it. There's nothing wrong with it, absolutely not, but it's very specific. Now, to contrast, here is so this is a device called the M-Wave 2 by a company called HeartMath. And the way that this works is you put this clip on your ear, like this, and what it's going to do is it's actually going to read my pulse. And I'm going to look at this meter right here. And so now it's starting to get my pulse. And this right here is a guide for my breath. And so what it's doing is it's actually in real time analyzing the pattern of my heart rate over time. And what it's looking for is a very specific pattern that corresponds to a balanced state for my body to be in. And I can learn to attain that state by watching this. Look at that, I'm automatically in it. By watching this thing, and then breathing, and then watching the color of this light, and it also has sound feedback as well. And so although this has the capability, if you want, after the fact, to look at your graphs just like this, and to see how you did, and to keep score and all that stuff, the main interaction is actually about teaching you right now how to realize in yourself a different experience, an experience of lower stress, in this particular case of more heart-centered feelings like gratitude and love and that kind of thing. So does that make sense, like the contrast between an experience like this and then one like this? They're very different. They're very different. So, live demo. Okay, so now we're ready for the next part of the talk. So that was the intro to consciousness hacking, kind of like Mikey's take on it. The next part, the second half of the talk, is basically going to be this crazy journey. I'll put this picture of a journey through. It's kind of haphazard, there's no real major ordering to it, but through a bunch of interesting projects and sites and links and concepts and research and a bunch of stuff that I think is cool to know about in the space, and then it's a bunch of browser tabs, and then at the end I can send you guys all the links and you can look through them and, you know, pursue anything that you're interested in. Now, that's going to be probably another 20 or 30 minutes. Do you guys want to take a little break, or do you want to just keep trucking through? Keep trucking. Okay, here we go. So, before we jump in, there's a little bit of background information I'm going to give you. So, these technologies are roughly broken into two categories. Stimulation, and stimulation, in this case, this is ultrasound stimulation, but this is what's called open loop, meaning it's something that is directly in some way influencing your body or your mind or your brain, and it's not really taking any information back to help it control. So for example, another example of this might be electrical brain stimulation, or magnetic brain stimulation, or something like that. Or even sound stimulation, light stimulation. When you listen to music, that is stimulation, because it's not responding to you in any way. Then the other side, the other major category is feedback, okay? And feedback, the way that works, this is a good example of it, is here you have this young gentleman with EEG electrodes on his head and on his face. And these are measuring the electrical activity of his brain in a very specific way. These are running to a computer, and that computer is looking at his brain activity, and it is saying, okay, we want your brain to be like this, but currently your brain is like this. And so, what the computer is going to do is it's going to create some kind of game, and you can look on the screen. It doesn't have to be a game, it could be anything, but in this case it's a game. And the game is played, or I should say the way to win the game is if you can make your brain do what the computer wants you to do. It's exactly the same as what I talked about with the fMRI machine where the person was looking at the graph. That's also a feedback loop, okay? And so, I'm going to, this is, as far as I know, no one classifies feedback in this way, so you're getting a unique perspective here. I'm going to give you a basic way of thinking about the different types of feedback that exist in the world, and I'm using three categories. Frequency, that's how often you do it. Are you doing it once a month, once a day, or all the time without ending, is the extreme. Bias, that is the extent to which the thing is deciding what you should be doing. So, okay, and I'll give you an example of that. The one we just talked about, well, I don't want to give it away because I'm going to have a quiz. But, so, I'll illustrate that in a second. And then delay is basically, is this real-time feedback? Is it constantly updating in every moment? Or is it updating like after an hour or a week or something like that? And so let me give you some examples here. Actually, this is gonna be a quiz. So here we go. So here is the example that I just talked about. So now in terms of frequency, is this person using this interaction, like sitting in the chair and strapping this thing on? Are they using it all the time without ever ending, 24 hours a day? Or are they using it occasionally? Okay. And then bias. Does this system have a preconceived idea of what that person's brain should look like? Or, and then yes, and then the opposite would be, it's just acting as like a mirror, like a neutral reflection without any bias. And then delay is this real time, meaning is this game constantly updating? Or is it like not updating very frequently at all? It's real time. So, you guys are good. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another one. So this is an art project, but interesting, worth noting. It got some media attention. It was cool, and what she did was she created these little pools of water. See, she's surrounded by pools of water, and those pools of water are responding to her brainwaves. And she's just meditating, I guess, or doing whatever she's doing. It doesn't actually matter. And the vibration, or the ripples in the water, are changing based on alpha, theta, beta, gamma. These are the main kind of chunks of brainwaves that we like to look at. So it's a cool art project, right? So I'll ask the same question. How often is she sitting down and actually using this thing? Occasionally. Now, is this biased? Does this thing have a preconceived idea of what her brainwaves should be? No, it's totally unbiased. It's just a reflection of her brainwaves. Is there a long delay? Or is it happening in real time? Real time. Okay, cool. And then the last one, the basis watch. Okay, so how often are you sitting down and looking at the charts and graphs? Occasionally. Is there a bias here? Does the system, which is analyzing the data, have a preconceived idea of how you should be? This is a trick question, actually, so it's continuous. So, okay, depends. I heard some of those. And then delay, is this happening in real time, or is this asynchronous? Not the measurement, but the actual feedback. Asynchronous. So, yes, yes, and then this one, it actually does depend. If you're just looking at the charts and graphs, it actually is unbiased. You know, nothing's totally unbiased, but it's not actually saying this is bad and this is good. It's just saying your heart rate's up, your heart rate's down. But what they include in their interface is also this whole notion in their marketing, in their interface, how they structure it, of goals, setting goals. And inherent in those goals is an idea of right and wrong. You're supposed to lose weight, you're supposed to take more steps, you're supposed to burn more calories. So there is a bias in there, but it's not completely biased. It's just partially biased. So there's Mikey Siegel's patented 3 facets of feedback. Okay, so now, we're going to jump in. There's 3 categories now, and I'm going to run you through a bunch of stuff. So this is research and background. Okay. So this is just some tabs that I threw together here that I thought would be interesting. So first of all, to go over the main types of technology. So EEG, electroencephalography. This is reading the electrical activity from your brain using small electrodes. It could be anywhere from 1 electrode to 256 electrodes, like a crazy hat on top of your head. You can see on some examples over here. And this is very common from consumer space now, where the Muse that I was holding up before, that's an example of EEG. And then full-on, really advanced clinical grade technologies where you can do really sophisticated stuff. So for example, this is an example of software which is freely available, where you can actually read the data from EEG, and you can actually do things like, for example, use the data of what's happening on the surface of the scalp to actually understand what's happening below the surface, what's happening spatially inside of the brain, in the same way you would with fMRI. There's lots of stuff being done with EEG. That could be 100 hours of presentation. This is the fMRI machine that I talked about before. Someone slides in, and it's actually looking at the blood perfusion in the brain, how blood is flowing. And the idea is that blood flow in the brain is somehow correlated to activity in the brain in certain ways. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, like what I talked about earlier, for example, real-time fMRI feedback. And it's not just that one research project that I mentioned, but it's kind of crazy. You can actually choose almost an arbitrary area in the brain and teach someone how to control that part of the brain, which is totally a crazy concept and consistently seems to be true. As they continue to move through and try different parts of the brain. There's now a good handful of different parts of the brain that have been explored in this way. MEG, magnetoencephalography, is another technology. What this has in common with EEG, but is distinct from fMRI, is that MEG and EEG have high what's called temporal resolution. Meaning you can take really fast measurements, which is useful if you want to look at things that change really quickly in the brain. But it's more difficult with those technologies to kind of do the math to figure out what is happening inside, because they're mainly looking at the surface. fMRI is really slow. It's like once a second or something. You know, you get a new piece of data once a second. Whereas these, you could get new pieces of data tens of thousands of times a second or more. But fMRI, you can look inside the brain and get a better idea of what's happening in the inner workings of it. So you can do the same kind of real-time MEG feedback. Now, all of these, using MEG, using fMRI, and using EEG, there are projects using all of those technologies that are based specifically around, not that many of them, but around this space of consciousness hacking, enlightenment engineering, contemplative engineering, whatever you want to call it. But around understanding what happens in a meditator's brain, and then using these technologies to try to teach people to change their brain in that way. It's a very niche, very narrow space. There's very few people doing it, but in all of these technologies, there are at least a couple examples of that happening. And there are other technologies which are not as common. You can actually use light to image the brain. There's a few technologies in that space. I'm just giving you one example called diffuse optical tomography. But there's other ways of using light to look inside the brain as well. This is just, then there is a whole world. There's so much stuff that I can never get through it. There's a whole world of more, you could say, fringe stuff that is not happening inside of mainstream academia. This is one that actually borders. I encourage you guys to watch these videos here, this series of 3 imaging acupuncture points with fMRI. This is a professor from UC Irvine, actually, or Davis or Irvine, and he did incredible work using an array of ultrasound transducers to actually look at acupuncture points, meridians, in real time, and he could actually watch chi energy moving through the body, which totally sounds fringe and not, like something that you would, that would not be acceptable in mainstream academia. And you're right in that respect, but the research was done impeccably well, and it was published, and this all happened at a major university. So this is the kind of stuff that is happening, stuff that you don't hear about as much, looking at more subtle processes, and there are quite a few more technologies like that. So in the stimulation world, this is ultrasound brain stimulation, and this is actually a really famous consciousness professor, Stuart Hameroff, and he's one of a few people that are looking at this. At our last meetup in San Francisco, we had a guy named Sterling Cooley present, and he was creating one of the first DIY ultrasound brain stimulation devices. So let me give you an idea of what this means. So what ultrasound brain stimulation allows you to do, and there's a few different forms of it, but it allows you to actually pinpoint with decent accuracy an area inside the brain and modulate the activity in that part of the brain, increase the activity, decrease the activity, or sort of scramble the activity. It's incredibly powerful and incredibly precise, and it's fairly early as far as this technology is concerned, even in academic context, but it's only a matter of time before this and other things that I'm going to present start to make their way into the hacker DIY space, which is, you know, where we have one foot inside of. So this is a technology to keep an eye on. So transcranial magnetic stimulation. This is where instead of using ultrasound to stimulate the brain, you're actually using really powerful magnets. And the difference here, first of all, aside from the fact that it's a magnet that's stimulating the brain, is that it's much more diffuse. You don't have the ability to really pinpoint and target one specific area. But this has been this has a lot more clinical work and research associated with it, and there are actually FDA-approved interventions, including I think treating depression, that use transcranial magnetic stimulation. So this isn't fringe. This is like a mainstream thing that has clinical use. It's kind of crazy to watch this use because the magnet's really loud and clicks really loudly. And you can do things like interrupt people's motor process. So you can like, your hand can be frozen and then they stop and you're like, oh, I can move. It's kind of crazy. So this is closer to our domain here. This is a project called the God Helmet. Michael Persinger, who's a researcher at University of Vancouver. I can't remember exactly where. Huh? Laurentian University. And the God Helmet got a lot of media attention. It's using magnetic stimulation as well. It's not the same as the transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's not the same power. These are weaker magnets, and they are positioned in a very specific way and patterned in a specific way. And he's famous because he actually was creating experiences. For example, the experience of presence, the perception of someone being there watching you, or someone being there next to you, and other types of things that are closer to mystical or transcendent experiences as well. And there's actually a person who's actually selling this same technology. One day I'll bring that into the meetup. That's interesting. So TDCS is probably the technology, surely the technology in this domain that has the most widespread popularity in the maker-hacker world. So TDCS stands for transcranial direct current stimulation. And it's literally passing an electrical current through your brain. Now, I know what you're thinking. So this is about 3 orders of magnitude, or like 1,000 times weaker than electroconvulsive therapy. It feels almost like a tingling sensation. It's very safe. There's no real record of anyone really seriously hurting themselves. And it has a decent amount of research now behind it, a fair number of clinical trials. Now the interesting thing about this is, which makes it one kind of very notable technology, is, let's see here. This is all you need to do to build one. Which, from a DIY perspective, basically this is like $5 worth of stuff from Radio Shack. So, one trip to Radio Shack, and you can actually be with the same, the electricity is the same, right? Coming from a 9-volt battery or coming from, you know, a $3,000 worth piece of clinical equipment. The safeguards are not the same. But 2 milliamps through the brain is 2 milliamps through the brain. And so, in theory, you can be doing the exact same work that is happening in a clinical or research context at your home for $5 worth of parts. Can you make a mistake? Absolutely. What are the dangers? Not horrible. You're not going to die. There's stories of people losing their sight for small amounts of time. I've certainly built one of these before and done my own research. The interesting thing is the taste of metal in your mouth that you get when you unplug it in the wrong way. So this has a whole community around it, and I'll actually show you that in a little while. this is an interesting application, what I think is one of the coolest consciousness hacking things to come out of research in the last couple years, where they actually electrically stimulated the brain in the gamma frequency range, which is a specific frequency range in the brain corresponding to certain things. Meditation is one of them. And they did that while someone was in REM sleep, when they're dreaming. And they were actually able to increase the likelihood of someone having a lucid dream by using this brain stimulation. And so this is kind of a very clear, cut and dry, very cool application of technology here. Using this very specific, well-researched, well-controlled stimulation to the brain that's very safe, and now you can give people access to lucid dreams. Very, very interesting. So I threw this in here just because I think it's a cool sign of the times. So I've been watching this space very closely for the last 4 years or so, and there's an interesting division that you see where meditation research is now allowed in mainstream academia. But, and this is, I realize, something we didn't really talk about yet. I'm not going to go into it because that's a whole can of worms. But what you're not allowed to talk about so much, or at all, in mainstream academia, is actually really why people meditate at all. Not why we meditate, because we meditate for the same reasons we take pharmaceuticals. We do it to treat clinical conditions, because that's how meditation has been adapted to the West. It's used the pharmaceutical model. But in the East, that's not at all why people meditate. They meditate because there is a very clear, defined goal, which is called in some contexts enlightenment, or considered the eradication of human suffering. It has many different names, and not everyone agrees on what it is. It's not necessarily one thing, but there's a very particular space of experience that has very consistent properties across religions, across spiritual traditions. One of my closest collaborators, Jeffrey Martin, who was on the a few slides ago, he's done some of the most groundbreaking research in this space, bringing this idea of enlightenment, or what he calls persistent non-symbolic experience, just to give it a scientific term, bringing it into a Western scientific context. So you can study it and build a map of it just like you would anything else, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. It's something that you can find the correlates to in the brain and in the body. And so that has been totally taboo to talk about in mainstream academia. And I've had these conversations with the really top neuroscience folks that are doing the contemplative or meditation research. And behind the scenes, you can acknowledge it. You can have the conversation with them and say, hey, it's crazy, right? And they're like, yeah, it's totally crazy, but I'll lose my job if I talk about enlightenment. It's for real. This is really cool because this was, I think, the beginning of 2014. I don't see the date here. The end of 2013, this is the first time that I know of that the word enlightenment, not in a historical context, like the Enlightenment, Age of Enlightenment, but the word enlightenment appeared in a neuroscience context in a major neuroscience journal. From major neuroscientists. David Vago is a well-respected, I'm not familiar with Jake Davis's work, but I am with David Vago's. So it was in the opinion section, it wasn't a research study, but this is a cool, very cool sign that times are changing. So another cool thing to know about this is called the Center for Neuroacoustic Research, a guy named Jeffrey Thompson. He does amazing research looking at how sound can affect the brain. He has some of the most powerful interventions that I've ever seen from a clinical context using technology to change the way the central nervous system works, and through that to change the way that people feel. I gotta move a lot faster. So there's a whole world of biofeedback and neurofeedback. If you were to just Google biofeedback or go to Yelp or something, for almost any major city, you can find dozens or more practitioners. This is its whole own, entirely self-contained universe. It has its own conferences. Here's one, its own societies. Here's another conference. And this is, and it's largely insulated from mainstream academia. So they're kind of like two parallel things that are happening in a sense. This is one of the, in my mind, one of the most interesting places to look historically for work in this space of consciousness hacking. This is Anna Wise. You can check out her books if you want to see someone that's, you know, a number of decades ago done some really interesting work looking at real-time EEG feedback and how to guide people into states of mystical experience and states of well-being. And then this is a great book, The Awakened Mind. There's Elmer Green. He's one of the first guys to actually go to India. There's actually a documentary, which is awesome. One of the first guys to actually go to India and put EEG electrodes and other physiological sensors on these yogis in India to actually start to measure what is happening. This was totally groundbreaking at the time. The machine they had was one of those machines where it was drawing on the paper and then had a camera, and it would take a film picture once a second, and that was their memory, like their hard drive was like this film. It's totally crazy. And this is a book that he wrote, Beyond Biofeedback. I also recommend that. These are old books, but remarkably things haven't changed much. In terms of communities, the Buddhist geek community is probably one of the most relevant to this space of interest. I recommend you guys check out the Buddhist Geek podcast. That's where, you know, I have a thing on there, but lots of more interesting people than me have interviews and stuff on there that are interested in this domain. It's not just about Buddhism strictly, it's really the merging of the two. And there's a conference this in October. I highly recommend it. If you want to go to the conference, I have a $150 off coupon that they gave me to give to you guys. So I think I already sent something out to you, so check your email. The other one is Science and Non-Duality. This is another community which I think you guys will all find very interesting. And they also have a conference in October that you should go to. There's going to be a bunch of interesting technology there. And I also have a discount for you guys for that conference. This is another thing to know about. This is the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. And this is a little more on the philosophical side, but these guys are thinking really deeply about this sort of, with kind of a transhumanist, if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay, but kind of a transhumanist edge to them, or a foundation. But they're really thinking about this relationship looking way forward of technology and consciousness. So another conference that you guys should have on your radar is the Neurogaming Conference. This is much more industry oriented. This is not woo-woo or philosophical at all. This is like the brain and technology coming together. But there's a lot of very cool stuff going on there. This is a cool blog, website, RSS feed, a thing to subscribe to read if you're interested. It's called Moby Health News, and it's the whole intersection point of wearable devices, health, well-being, technology. Singularity Hub. This is more on the futurist, transhumanist, Ray Kurzweil side of the fence, and this is like people that imagine a future where our consciousness is inside of a machine, and they also, like, lots of articles in here about EEG, biofeedback, and new forms, like, you know, the dream study that would have been published on this site. This is a local group. If you really want to get your hands dirty, like you want to get out a soldering iron, or you want to start writing some code right now, I recommend that you check out, this is like a cousin group of ours, the Cognitive Technology Group. They're based out of UC Berkeley. Okay. All right, I'm going to go through the rest of this really fast. Whoa. Okay. Okay. So this is going to be really quick. I'm just going to really run through this stuff, and then all these links are going to be available to you to check out. So these are tools and resources that may be interesting for you to use. So This is, start with Emotiv. We got Jacob here. This is one of their products. It's an EEG device that you can use, you can develop on, it has an open API, and it reads your brainwaves. NeuroSky is another company doing a similar thing. They have a very low cost device, under $100, and also you may get what you pay for. So this is the Muse. That's the one I showed you earlier. It's made by a company called Interaxon. It's another device in the space. I recommend you take a look at them. They have an app which is one of the best real-time meditation feedback apps that I've seen. This is OpenBCI. This is a clinical grade, open source, 8-channel EEG, completely open. The hardware design, the library, everything is completely open. This is designed for makers and hackers. Instructables is a really good site to know about if you want to get into building some stuff. These are just a bunch of different EEG related projects on there. So I mentioned TDCS, so now on the tools side, this is one center point for the DIY TDCS community. Here's another one. Oh no, this is a commercial TDCS device that you can buy. They're targeting it for gamers. The reason why I put it in this category is because this device you can actually also use for your own, if you wanted to do personal research or something like that, you can actually program this device yourself and pull the electrodes out and put them on different parts of your brain. This is another central gathering hub. This entire Reddit is focused on people building and doing their own personal research with this electrical brain stimulation, the TDCS. So there's a whole world of this happening, interestingly. This is a device that does EKG and EMG, that's electrical heart activity and muscle activity. This is an open source device, the link will be available. This is one of many heart rate straps that you can wear across your chest. A lot of these have open APIs, so if you want to develop an app based on heart rate or heart rate variability, this is one that I recommend, at least for just prototyping and playing around. This is another one, Zephyr. Both of these make high quality technologies that you can use to sort of get started if you want to build something. This is a device that does EMG. It's another open source device, small, inexpensive. If you want to begin prototyping something that senses muscle movement, right? So if you want to teach someone how to relax their muscles or build a game where the way to win the game is to change the way your muscles are flexed. This is a local startup, Semaxis. And they're building a little stick-on sensor that's wireless that is pretty cool, and that senses muscle movement, it senses heart, and if you put it on your head, it will actually sense your brain activity. And that's also totally open API, so you can develop programs for that. This is a pulse sensor, an open pulse sensor. You can clip it on your ear or put it on your finger, and it measures your pulse. It's $25. This is a project to create an open source transcranial magnetic stimulation device, the one that's used in clinical context, the one that actually uses really powerful magnets to stimulate your brain. So these guys are working on creating a completely open design for that. This is a cool project. This is like a maker-hacker kit where it's got a bunch of different sensors as all part of the kit. There's like 6 or 7 different sensors on here for sensing different aspects of your body and physiology. This is another one. I'm just going to zip through these. You can check them out later. These are all tools that exist that you can use. This is just some. These are the maybe 30 or 40% of ones that I have. This actually measures emotion using the camera. The video camera on your computer or on your phone, analyzing your facial expressions. So you can imagine actually creating real-time feedback based on your emotional state from looking at your face. And then, of course, the iWatch, the Google Watch, Samsung Watch, there's a bunch of watches coming out. These all have heart rate sensors on them, because that's going to be the new, after activity sensors, it's going to be heart rate sensors. That's the new wave of sensors that's going to be emerging. Particularly this Apple Watch has really cool interactions. One is that you can actually not only send people your heartbeat, but you can send people gestures as well. And if you look back at our different types of interactions, this is really a non-conceptual interaction. This is like reaching out and touching someone or holding someone. So it's very cool to see, even on Apple's side of the fence, that instead of sending a text message, you're actually thinking about these more intimate forms of connection. And then our last thing. All right. Now these are all commercial products or really cool art installation type projects that I think you guys will like. So Think is going to be, they're not released yet, I have tried it, it's going to be the first consumer electrical brain stimulation device. And what they're targeting is basically the glass of wine that you have at the end of the evening and the cup of coffee you have in the morning. And so you put this thing when you get home at night, you put it on your brain, on your head it has a couple sticky electrodes and one goes behind your back, on your neck, and it stimulates your brain in a very specific way to create that kind of change. And that's their target. There's a lot of possibilities there, well beyond sort of that kind of relaxation or kind of little caffeine boost kind of up experience. So this is a friend of mine, Rohan, this is his project. Definitely check it out. He has an app that is a real-time meditation feedback app. You put a $100 device on your head, and it will actually use a special algorithm that he created from traveling through India and measuring monks' brainwaves, and it helps guide you into a deeper state of meditation. This is an awesome project called Sound Self. Oh, you should totally check this out. It doesn't even have a thing. So the way this works is you can't really hear, but what you do is you actually sing into it, and there's no winning, there's no losing. It's a totally new concept in gaming. And as you sing, this thing actually sings back to you in harmony. And singing not a song, but toning, like And the visuals are completely responsive and based on your voice. And this is a really cool way to think about how we can interact with technology. It's totally intimate, it totally changes the way that you feel. It's very meditative, and it has no graphs at all.
What was the name of that again?
Sound Self. Sound Self. Here's another one. So this is a device, this is an app that connects to your a heart rate monitor, any one of them, like the few that I showed you earlier, or the Apple Watch when it comes out. And this creates this totally beautiful pulsing visual based on your heart rate variability. And you can just sit down and sink in and just watch these visuals change, and it can guide you towards a state of relaxation, kind of like what the heart math thing does, except this is a little more beautiful. This is just fun. I don't know, this guy created some hat that I don't even know why I put in there. It's not really doing anything. Well, actually, it's a good example of like kind of something that would seem like consciousness hacking. Like he has a hat that responds to his brainwaves, so it's kind of funny idea. But actually, it's not really changing the way that he feels. It's just kind of like measuring his brain and then just putting it on his head. So, there's a lot of smaller projects. Like this guy is doing something pretty cool. He created this whole kind of visual environment based on, like it's got light and sound, you can't really hear, based on your brainwaves. So you kind of sit back and relax in this chair, and then you get to sort of experience in an unbiased way, right, your brainwaves. This is another cool project. I don't know, Theta Lab. I'm not gonna. Okay, this is awesome. This is one of the most psychedelic experiences I've ever had with technology. So it's a really powerful combination of this powerful halogen light and then these lights that flicker in a very specific frequency. And you sit down with your eyes closed with this thing in front of you, and it creates an incredible psychedelic experience based on these flickering lights. And using lights as a form of stimulation is not new. These guys just happen to do it in a very interesting and unique way. This is another one. This is actually, I believe, reading galvanic skin response, which is the change in the conductivity of your skin, which is a measure of your arousal. So you could be really upset or really happy, but it's an interesting insight into your body. And so they're kind of using this to structure different kinds of interactions on your wrist. The M-Wave 2 I talked about from HeartMath. You should check out that company. They're doing some cool stuff. Oh, this is really interesting. This is like a whole new category. I just talked to the creator of this app last night on the phone, and it really blew me away. So I'm skeptical but convinced at the same time, and so I can't reconcile the two. But there is a phenomenon by which people somehow seem to be able to influence random number generators. And it happens both on an individual basis and also when there are large world events. It's hard to explain, and it doesn't seem to follow rules that we can really cope with from a mainstream scientific perspective, but it does seem to be real, just not very well understood. No one really understands it. This guy created a game around it where to win the game, you're influencing the outcome of a random number generator, which of course should be random. And so he's using like NIH level, like highest standard for random numbers, both on inside the phone and also using an Australian source for the random numbers. And you can play this game and you can actually win. You can change how the random numbers are being generated. So I thought there was some gimmick to it, and you guys can try this after the meetup. And I talked to the guy for 2.5 hours, and it's real. There's no real good explanation for it, and we can talk more about it later, and maybe I'll have the guy come in and present at a future meetup. But totally other, completely different world there. So binaural beats, that's another whole world. This is the Monroe Institute. They have some of the most interesting stuff around binaural beats. You could spend a whole year just playing around there. That's sound played in a certain pattern from the left and right ear to influence the brain and drive certain frequency patterns in the brain. Here's an example of a cool product made by a buddy of mine, Mitch. It's called the NeuroDreamer Sleep Mask, and it flickers light in a certain pattern over your eyes and plays binaural beats, plays sound, and it's a soft mask. You can put it on before you go to bed or when you want to meditate, and it is pretty effective at drawing and guiding you into different altered states. That's a category of devices, of which there are many. They go by different names. One of them is light sound stimulation devices. We have one of our members of the meetup who's not here today, who has this company called MindSpa. It's avstim.com, and this is another company that produces these devices. These are pretty high quality, fairly sophisticated, and it's glasses you wear, they flicker in a certain pattern, and there's associated sound as well. This was one of my favorite projects at Burning Man. This is like an example of an installation piece. All of these balloons have individually controlled lights inside of them. And you can walk through this space of balloons as they sort of blow in the wind. It's a very organic feeling. And then they have this woman singing through this crazy synthesizer. And she also happens to be an incredible singer. And there's no biofeedback here, there's no measuring your brain waves, but just in terms of creating a space that totally alters your experience, this did an incredible job of that. So you should check out their videos online. This is made by actually this guy named Jay, who's currently the, let's see if we can even see. He's currently the head UI UX designer for Interaxon Muse, that headband that David was showing you. He created this thing called the Sonic Cradle, which is basically like a hammock that you lie in. And you're surrounded by your own biosignals, your heart, your breath. I don't actually remember all the things that he was measuring, but it's this totally immersive environment where you're almost like cocooned in a reflection of your own body. And it was a very cool project, very interesting. So this is another Burning Man project. I don't know if there's pictures of it, but it's this crazy looking organic blobby thing, and then you kind of enter through the side, and inside, let's see if they even have pictures of it. There you enter through that orifice, and then inside is a whole really interesting environment, and like the light stimulation devices that are designed to entrain your brain at certain frequencies, this is a whole space that entrains a whole group of people to this same brain frequency. It was very cool, very interesting. This is sort of old school. There's so many tangents that we don't have time. Virtual reality is a whole space here that there could be 1,000 projects just in this consciousness hacking space, just in the virtual reality and augmented reality domain. This is from 1995, and oh, right, we can't watch it. And so this person created this interaction in 1995 where you actually strap on and you're suspended in midair wearing virtual reality glasses, goggles, they're huge. And you're moving through this beautiful space. You're underwater, you're flying, you're looking at trees, you're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So you can imagine now with the Oculus Rift and the technology that's available to us in terms of biosensing, the possibilities are endless. Imagine you're actually flying through some space which is a reflection of your own brain. But that is changing according to your state of meditation, for example. And as you move and as you change, the whole environment responds to that internal state shifting and modulating and changing. And you can actually learn to meditate by actually navigating through this whole virtual immersive reality. I don't know, just making things up. Whoa. Oh. Yeah, we want to see this. This is cool. So this is another example of virtual reality. It's called the machine to be another. And it actually allows you to see from another person's perspective. And so you're actually looking out of someone else's eyes. And I believe the way they did this is one person was a trained actor, like in terms of being able to really move their body in a very controlled way. And so they actually were mimicking the other person's hand movements. So one person is trained in this. So now I'm looking through these virtual reality goggles because I'm like seeing someone else, and I move my hand, and like I see a hand move. And so it creates this sense of presence, and it actually can have this effect of really swapping how you perceive yourself and where you perceive yourself. This is another project that does the same thing. So imagine this. I'm sitting in a chair, okay, and I'm wearing virtual reality glasses, and I'm looking ahead, but behind me is a camera pointing at me. So now I'm looking ahead, but what I'm seeing is my back, which is kind of weird. Okay, so I'm looking at my back, but so now already this is research that's been done, and this can kind of trip you out. What it does is it changes your sense of embodiment. It changes where you perceive your physical location to be. Because actually that's not hard-coded. That's actually learned, believe it or not, and that can be messed with. And there's lots of other experiments that mess with that as well. But here's what they did. They projected the person's heartbeat onto that image of themselves. So now I'm sitting, I got the glasses on, I'm looking ahead of me, I'm seeing my own back, and I can raise my hand, and I see the hand raised, I'm like, that's interesting. And then my heart is beating. I don't know it's my heart, but it's beating on that person. And at a subconscious level, that actually increased the degree to which I was convinced that that was me there. And so all of a sudden, that's essentially an out-of-body experience. You feel as if you are watching yourself from somewhere else. And with all of these things, I think there's a possibility to begin to point at this fact that all these ideas we have about who we are, what we are, where we begin, where we end, are actually largely constructed. They're largely conventions that we subscribe to, whether biological conventions, for a good reason, or social conventions. But these things can be tweaked and messed with. And as we do that, we can begin to question at a fundamental level this sense of separateness, who am I? Where am I located? Do I really end at this surface of the skin? Where do I begin? When, you know, these kinds of, I think, very interesting and important questions. Here's another one that also questions the sense of identity, metamorphosis. I don't know if they have, let's just see what this video does to us here. Oh yeah, okay. So two people standing on either side of a partially polished glass. And so as they shift the lighting, you begin to both see yourself and another person. And so it's swapping your reflection with the vision of another person. And it's pretty trippy, as you can see. Anyway, just lots of interesting things happening in the world. This one is, you know, we're winding down here, but yeah, this is a crazy helmet. It slows, it gives you life in slow motion. So, this guy, first of all, you just got to see this guy. He's wearing this crazy helmet. There's the dude. Totally discreet. No one notices him. But look at the way he's perceiving reality. Okay, do we want the explanation? I don't think so. Okay, let's just look. So the way he's perceiving reality, everything is slowed down. And so it's one way of just altering reality. And I have, forgot to bring them, I try to usually bring them. I have these glasses, they're prism glasses. And you put them on, and when you look through them, you actually are looking straight down at your feet. And it's very simple, but it's actually the simplest way that you can just use a basic thing to totally tweak your perception of reality. And these kinds of tweaks on reality can be like little pills that you take that open a door to realizing, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's actually other ways of experiencing reality than what I had thought about. Largely the way that psychedelics are often used. I don't know, there's just all this stuff. This is another, yeah, just another thing. This was, you know, this is like seeing your brainwaves as, where is it? Seeing your brainwave, come on. Seeing your brainwaves as this really cool projection of, it's a ferrofluid, it's like a magnetic fluid that you can change with a magnet. And so as your brainwaves change, you can actually look inside this cauldron and see this crazy representation of your brainwaves as this changing pattern of fluid. So just, you know, that would be, I don't know how they implemented it, but that could be a cool example of like unbiased feedback, depending on how they implemented it. Oh, this is really nice. So these are some really close friends of mine, Rohan and Shiloh. And this is a Lotus project that was at Burning Man. It's also going to be at Science and Non-Duality conference if you come. And so each of these lotuses has two hands on it. And two people can put their hands on there, and it measures the pulse of those two people. And then it visualizes the pulse going up and down the stem. So it's a way for two people to sort of experience their pulse together and see their heartbeat moving up and down. This is a guy, actually, that he brought this to a consciousness hacking meetup. This is just a cool, tripped out visual experience called Indra's Net. And it's just like looking into infinity. It's really a trip. So what we're working together on is actually having this activated by EEG. So you can have two or more people's EEG brainwaves influencing this totally sort of infinite, never-ending visual craziness that you look into. And this is more historical. This is James Turrell does a lot of really interesting work with light. This was like a crazy sphere you go into, and you're in this. There's no definition around the walls. It's totally curved, so you can't actually see where the room begins and where the room ends. And then you're just bombarded with crazy light and sound. This is, yeah, there's so many things. Heartbeat amplifier chair. This will be at the Science and Non-Duality Conference 2. This is a chair that you sit in, where you can actually feel your own heartbeat through subwoofers in the chair, and you can do it with two people, where you feel each other's heartbeat. Very cool project. This is called the Mutual Wave Machine. There's video and stuff, but we don't have time to look at it. This is one of the first projects around neural synchronization, which is a whole cool topic where people synchronize their brainwaves together. And then this is an installation piece where people can do that in this like whole audio-visual environment. This is a cool video game, Journey. There's too many things. Deepak Chopra has a few things in this domain. One is a game called Leela. One is Wild Divine. These are some of my projects. I'll go through pretty quick. So there's HeartSync. HeartSync is going to be a permanent exhibit at the Tech Museum in San Jose. And, so the way that this works is a group of people sit down. It'll be different in the museum. But a group of people sit down, and in the same way that with one person, just turn this sound off, with one person with a HeartMath device, you can learn to realize this calm heart rate pattern by watching the visuals on the device. Here, you're actually watching these crazy geometric patterns. And in the same way, these geometric patterns are a reflection of your own heart rate, a certain pattern of your own heart rate variability. There's also a guide here for your breath. So what this does is not only guides each individual to this balanced state of heart rate variability, this balanced physiological state, but it actually guides the whole group to a synchronized, balanced heart rate variability pattern through this kind of crazy, tripped out audiovisual experience. And so I did this thing at Burning Man, and now this is going to be at a museum installation. So this is one of my interest areas, which is not just single-person interactions, but multi-person. How you can bring groups of people into this sense of connectedness. So let's see. This is probably the main. This is probably the main project that I'm working on. There's actually not good content on here because we're kind of in, I wouldn't say stealth mode, but we're not. Our prototype is not public at the moment. And what we're doing is we're turning brainwaves into music. And so you do this for two reasons. One is for entertainment. It's really cool to actually hear your brainwaves, not just direct transfer of brainwaves to sound, but actually working with some incredibly talented people to create engaging, mainstream, dynamic musical experiences based on your brain. But the other side of it is it's functional. This music can be actively used to change the way that your brain works. It's this feedback loop, like we talked about before. And so you can actually learn to understand your brain and yourself more deeply by listening to this really cool, interesting, engaging music. And then, there's other projects, but I'll just kind of skip ahead here. All right, so this was Burning Man recently. Okay, so this is called the Heart Cart. And so the Heart Cart is an experiment in creating a intimate two-person heart breath synchronization extravaganza that was really heavy to fight around Burning Man. So the idea is each person sits, if it's two people inside, kind of this cocoon-like structure, right? And it opens like a clamshell in the middle, and the two people are closed inside. And each person feels the other person's heartbeat through a personal subwoofer against their back, sort of vibrating their body. And each person sees and hears the other person's breath as sound and light filling the space. So every time, so like for example, you're looking at Lauren here, right? Every time she breathes, there's this halo of light pulsing behind her, shining through this mandala. And every time she breathes, you can hear as ocean waves, like whoosh, whoosh. Thanks to David. Thanks, David. David helped a lot with this project. You can hear the breath as ocean waves. And so each person is not just hearing the other person's breath, but there's this intermingling that happens here, where our biosignals are sort of being merged into this space together, and it sort of begins to blur the boundary of where I begin and you end, but it's also very conducive to respiratory synchronization, which is a really powerful way of connecting with someone, to breathe together with them. And so people would get in this thing, and they would, of course, do like a kind of eye-gazing, you know, meditative kind of thing, which is awesome, and people had really powerful experiences. But people would also just talk. We would just sit in it and connect. And it was like really nice space to just sit and talk with someone, because it was really enclosed, really safe, and something about this shared biosignal experience, very raw, very you know, I'm not like doing some crazy analysis on the breath, just giving it to you directly as a reflection, that created this sense of connection between people. Okay. So we're basically almost done. We're gonna now. You guys have been very patient. Wow, that's been a long time. Okay. All right. I'm gonna finish now. Yeah. So we're done. Sorry.